Hello everybody, welcome to your second sample question from the team over here at fullskillsexamprep.com. Now, if you went through the first residency requirements question, you saw that that one dealt with what counts towards residency, what doesn't count towards residency. This question is going to deal with that as well, but this question is going to focus more on the procedures that happen with permanent residents in meeting their residency requirements. So I hope you enjoy this question. We certainly enjoyed making it. And at the end of this, again, you're going to be a couple steps closer to passing the full skills exam. Okay, so let's start with our question here. So in this sample question, we have Danielle. Danielle is a 29-year-old permanent resident of Canada who originally moved to Ottawa on June 1st, 7 years ago, and did not leave Canada until she took a job teaching math at a private school in China for the last 3 years. During the last 3 years, she has spent every day of the 4-month summer holidays in Toronto so that she can spend time with her parents, and she usually takes a couple of summer classes at the college during this time. She has a great relationship with the school she works at and does not see herself changing jobs at any point in the near future, but wants to keep her PR status in case she ever decides to settle in Canada. She is currently in Toronto and will be starting her 4th contract in China on October 1st. As such, she books an appointment with Irina, an RCIC, to ask if there are any potential issues at the point of entry when she comes back to Canada next year and the year after. What is RCIC Irina likely to advise? Now we have our 4 options. So we have A, she will not have any issues at the POE next year, but the year after she will be inadmissible. We have B, she will not have any issues at the POE next year or the year after, because she'll have Canadian citizenship status. We have C, she will be inadmissible next year and will lose her PR status. And we have D, she will not have any issues at the POE next year or the year after. All right, so this one is going to require a little bit of math, a little bit of forward thinking. What you want to start doing, of course, is taking all this information, putting it into your scale, so your timeline. Now, I'll let you press pause on the video so you can begin doing this, even though you probably started in your head already. So if you want to press pause right now, we'll work on the analysis after you press play again. So what the question is asking really is what's going to happen to Danielle at the POE in 1 and 2 years. So let's get B out of the way. Now B says that she will not have any issues next year or the year after because she will have Canadian citizenship status. Now as we start looking for some information to support this or negate this, we have some details on her timeline. So she arrived in Ottawa June 1st, 7 years ago, didn't leave Canada until she started working in China, and we have the amount of time that she spends in Canada currently. Now, the timeline that you started making should probably begin looking something like this. This is one of those questions where they don't give us the year, so you just kind of count the years in your head, but you do need a starting point and an ending point for the 5 years. So we could see that she did spend those 4 years in Canada, but when we look at the question itself again, there is nothing mentioned about her even applying for citizenship. The question says that she is currently a permanent resident, and remember with citizenship, the person has to meet those citizenship residency requirements within the last 6 years. And she didn't apply for citizenship back then, so with her plan right now, she wouldn't be able to obtain Canadian citizenship at that time, And there's no mention of her even intending to seek this status or have this status or anything like that. So that is why B is not a correct answer. All right, so now that we've deleted B as a potential answer, we have to explore A, C, and D. And A, C, and D all deal with asking the question, really, what's going to happen to her when she is at the POE in 1 year and in 2 years. All right, so we have these three options to work through, and by analyzing what's going to happen next year at the POE, it'll help us delete one or two of these and work through the rest of the options. Of course, we need to really think of the timeline of Danielle. So when she arrived in Canada, what she's been doing, how much time she spent, etc. So we have a lot of really important information in the story, and that is we have the starting date for our first 5 years. We have what she's been doing for the last few years, and we have the amount of time that she's been spending in Canada for the next few years. All right, so remember that our timeline that we're looking at starts in June. So they give us a little bit of information here. They say that she originally moved to Ottawa June 1st, 7 years ago. Now, they don't give us the exact date for when she comes back to Canada, but they say summer holidays. So we would just assume it's June. In the context of the question, it doesn't actually make a difference if it's June or maybe the end of May or anything like that. So we would just say June to June, and we would keep it simple. All right, so as we saw before, the timeline we're looking at is something like this. So year 1 was when she originally moved to Ottawa. And you could see in the story again, it says she didn't leave Canada until she took a job teaching math at a private school in China for the last 3 years. Remember, it also says that she spends every day of the 4-month summer holidays in Toronto. So with this, we can get our first 5 years and analyze that. So we know that in the first 5 years, she stayed in Canada from June 1st of year 1 and then stayed for the summer until October 1st of year 5. Then she spent those 8 months in China before returning. So for the first 5 years, we could see that she has 4 years and 4 months of time spent in Canada. Now, in starting to recognize her routine, we know that from October until we would assume June 1st, she was working in China. And just to keep things simple for us, we would say that she arrived in Toronto on June 1st, and that is also the day that year 6 started. Now, the big question, of course, that we need to take a look at is when she arrives at the POE, what will the officer assess? So we're going to do this all the way through. We're going to keep this pretty simple. We're going to look at the years that she has been working in China and what happened at the POE, because we need to know what happened at the POE in order to just understand these general procedures, and of course to give us a better idea of what's going to happen in the next 2 years, which is exactly what the question is asking us. So in order to understand what's going to happen at the POE in 1 year and in 2 years, let's take a look at the possibilities of what can happen regardless of Danielle's situation. So as we saw from the lesson under Article 28, the permanent resident would arrive at the POE and the officer would essentially assess whether or not the person has met the residency requirements and whether or not the person can meet the residency requirements. If the answer is no to either of those, then that person would be issued a removal order. If the answer is yes, then the officer would again say, hey, welcome home and come on in. Now what we're doing with Danielle, of course, is taking her situation and analyzing it to see what would happen at the POE in a year and in 2 years if she still works in China for 8 months a year. Now, in order to be thorough in our analysis of this question, let's take a look at what happened to her in the past when she returned to Canada after completing that first contract in China. So we know that she spent 4 years in Canada. She didn't leave the country. And then she took a contract to teach in China. So just to keep things simple for ourselves, we'll say that her plane landed on June 1st. And that's the same day that year 6 started in the timeline that we are looking at. When she arrived at the POE, the officer assessed whether or not she had met her requirements, and maybe whether or not there is time for her to meet her requirements. At this point, she would have been a permanent resident for 5 years, so he would not even look at that one. We know that she stayed in Canada from June 1st of the first year until October 1st of the 5th year. So with this, we know that she spent 4 years and 4 months in Canada out of the last 5. The 8 months that she was not in Canada, that deals with the contract that she was working when she was teaching in China. And of course, when she arrives at the POE, the officer would say, hey, welcome home. She has met her residency requirements at that point, so there's no risk of her losing her PR status due to not meeting the residency requirements. Now, when we take a look at the second year where she returned to Canada after completing that second contract in China, again, we'll take a look at what happened. All right, so her plane landed in Toronto on June 1st, and that is the same day that year 7 started in the timeline that we're looking at. Of course, the officer would take a look at her documentation, at everything like that, to see if she met the requirements or not. And we can see that with our new timeline here, she has been in Canada for 3 years and 8 months out of the last 5 years. So, of course, the officer would, again, smile, give her a thumbs up, and say, welcome home. All right, so this is where we start to really take a look at how this timeline relates to the question that we need to answer. So we could see that after the 3 contracts that she completed, same thing. She returned to Toronto. This is where our scenario starts as well, and that's where year 8 starts. So same thing, the officer will say hello and take a look at her documentation to see how long she has been in Canada to see if she meets her residency requirements. And in this case, she would, because she has been in Canada at that point for 3 years out of the last 5. So she still has 2 years on that 4-year gap when she was in Canada originally. And even though she's only been in Canada for 4 months per year for the last 3 years, at that point, those 4 months would add up to 1 year. So she exceeds those residency requirements still. So that brings us up to the present. Now, this is when she comes to see the RCIC and ask about the future. And you're going to get clients like this as well when you start working as an RCIC. So what she wants to do is go back to China and stay on the same contract again. So what we need to look at is whether or not she'll face any issues when she returns to Canada after year 8 to start year 9. All right, so when she arrives at the POE at this point, the officer will do exactly what he does or she does, which is to make sure that the permanent resident has met those residency requirements. And at this point, when she's returning, she has still met those residency requirements, because at that point, she's been in Canada for 2 years and 4 months out of the last 5. So she would be allowed entry into Canada at that point. Now this gives us a great little hint, because we can omit C as a potential answer, because she will not be inadmissible the next year. And now finally we're left with only A and D. So A and D both show that she will be admissible next year, but the difference is that with A, they say she will be inadmissible the year after, and with D, they say that she will not have any issues at all the year after. Okay, so at this point in our timeline, we're looking at her working in China. So at that point, when she returns to Canada to begin year 10, so right at the end of year 9, that will be the end of her 5th contract in China. Now, when she shows up at the border, the officer will of course take a look and do the math to see if she has met those residency requirements for the last 5 years. And with this, when we take a look at this ourselves, we can see that she's only spent 1 year and 8 months now in Canada out of the last 5 years. So at this point, the officer would issue a removal order. And because of that removal order, we know that A is the correct answer. All right, so now you might be saying, yeah, but she can appeal, or she can still enter Canada, maybe she can apply for an H&C, etc. And those are all certainly valid points, except remember, it's not in the question. So we need to really focus on the question itself and the potential answers that they give us, and that will lead us towards the correct answer. All right, so a big thank you for tuning in. It's always such a pleasure helping everybody pass the full skills exam. If you are one of the people who is watching this video and working through the lessons about 2 months before the exam, you are doing exactly what you should be doing, so congratulations to you. If you are one of the people who maybe came to the seminar and this is part of your individual study plan, keep up the good work. You're just about there. All right, so thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and keep working. You're going to do really well on the exam. You've got one more question coming up. The next question is pretty difficult, so be prepared, and I hope you're looking forward to the challenge.